So what I would like you to do is do this next example on your own. Pause the video and just compute these values when f of x is the square root of x. Okay, so f of 4, this would be the square root of 4, which we know is 2. And by the way, we should just, this is a function, so we're only talking about the positive square root. We're not, if we would want the minus square root, the negative square root, we'd write minus square root of x. F of negative 3, well, if we try to plug this in here, square root of negative 3, that's undefined, right? We're only going to be working with real numbers here. So really, because we'll talk a little bit about imaginary numbers maybe a little bit later, but right now, as far as we're concerned, we're just only going to be working with reals. So we say this is undefined. F of 0, that's the square root of 0, which is 0. And f of 1 is the square root of 1, which is 1. What's the domain? Well, the domain is any number that we can plug in for x. And I just said, the square root, we can take the square root of 0, well, we can take the square root of any positive number, but no negative numbers. Okay, so the domain would be all values x greater than or equal to 0, or as an interval, it would be 0 to infinity, where we include the 0. Right. The range, if you think about this, because this is the square root, positive square root, the output is always going to be a positive number or 0. So it's also, some people would say, you can say y greater than or equal to 0 or x greater than 0, that would all be okay. Or you can just write 0 to infinity again. Any positive number is going to be the square root of something. Okay. In fact, it will be the for example, if you take 5, 5 is going to be 5 is obviously the square root of 25. Okay, but anyway, any number is going to be the square root of its square. So maybe I can just say y is going to be the square root of y squared. Okay, if y is greater than or equal to 0. All right. The two rules when you're trying to find the domain of a function is very simple. You can't divide by 0, and you can't take the square root of a negative number, like I just said. So those are the two things. Now, as long that then if you observe for this, anything else will be okay. So if I ask you to find the domain of these functions here, 1 over x, well, this will always be defined as long as x is not 0. So the domain would be all x not equal to 0. Okay. If the next one, if g of x is equal to 2x, so divided by x plus 3, the numerator can be anything we want. It's just the denominator can't be 0. So x plus 3 can't be 0. So what is that? Well, set x plus 3 equal to 0. We get x equals negative 3. And then we can see this is the only number that doesn't work. Okay, so the domain would be all x not equal to negative 3. Okay. So you can leave. Okay, so I guess you can write this in interval notation as well. This would be negative infinity to negative 3, union negative 3 to infinity. And this here would be negative 3, 0. 0. Okay. Now for square roots, it's not so much x has to be greater, has to be a non-negative, but x plus 4 has to be non-negative. So you want x, whatever's under the square root, you want to set that to be greater than or equal to 0. And then you go from there, we can subtract 4 from both sides, and we get x is greater than or equal to negative 4. Okay. So that would be the domain, or in interval notation, this would be negative 4 to infinity. And then in this next one, here we have a sum of two expressions. Both of these expressions have to be defined for this sum to exist. This will make sense except when x is 0. this will make sense when x is not 7, right? If 7 minus x is 0, that means x is 7. So the domain here would be all x not equal to 0 or 7. Okay. Or in interval notation, this would be negative infinity to 0, union 0, 7, union 7, infinity. Okay, next page. Here you have we have a couple things to worry about. We obviously x minus 4 has to be greater than or equal to 0, but you can see that in this case it can't be equal to 0, because if x minus 4 is 0, then we have the square root of 0 is 0, and then we'll have a 0 in the denominator. Okay, so we have to worry about both things. So the domain will be all x strictly greater than 4. And as interval notation, we use the round bracket. Okay, again, the x up here can be any number we want. In this one, we can pretty much plug any number in we want for x. Okay, we're not dividing by anything or taking square roots, so this would be all real numbers. And then here, here we just want to make sure that x, we're not dividing by 0. What are the possible values where this could be 0? Well, if we set the denominator equal to 0. Okay, we can do this a number of ways, but the easiest way is just say this means x squared equals 1, so x would be either 1 or negative 1. Okay, so those are the two numbers that would cause us problems. So the domain would be all x not equal to 1 or negative 1.